I'll also begin, this is a public meeting, and I'll read the notice of public hearing and the launch of grant funding round for the Beverly Community Preservation Committee notice that was published in the paper and sets forth what's going to be accomplished tonight. Notice is hereby given pursuant to Article 7, Section 7.49 of the Beverly City Ordinances that the Beverly Community Preservation Committee, known as the CPC, will hold a public informational hearing and launch of the CPA grant funding round on Thursday, September 14th at 7 p.m. The City of Beverly adopted the Community Preservation Act, CPA, in 2012. There are 4 types of projects that may receive funding per the CPA: 1, open space; 2, recreation; 3, historic preservation; and 4, community housing. A total of 75 projects have been approved for funding to date. CPC members will provide a brief overview of the Community Preservation Act, 3 successful CPA projects, the application process and materials, the 2022 to 2023 funding round schedule. They will also invite participants to both ask questions about the process and offer their thoughts on the needs, possibilities, and resources of the city as they relate to the community preservation. The CPC previously developed a community preservation plan for Beverly that outlines goals for each of the project categories eligible for funding. The plan and related information is available on the CPC's website at https. I can do the whole thing, but I'm just going to say the Beverly community website, which is at beverlymass.gov. Residents and members of the Beverly community are welcome and encouraged to share or seek input on potential projects, including regional projects. The meeting will take place in the City Council Chambers, Beverly City Hall, 191 Cabot Street, Beverly, Mass. 01915. Additional details will be provided on the Beverly Community Preservation Committee agenda that will be posted on the city's website at least 48 hours prior to the meeting. Derek Beckwith, chairperson. So welcome, everyone. Tonight, in a few minutes, we'll enter the formal public hearing meeting, and so we'll take a motion to open that in a minute. But in the meantime, I just wanted to take a few minutes to welcome you all. This is the biggest attendance since I've been on the committee, which is about 5 years now. And to also say a special thanks to a couple of parties. First of all, to Darlene Wynn, the city planning director, who provides incredible assistance to the committee and to the staff of the Beverly Planning Department. And also to BevCam, which is televising us live tonight. Thank you very much. And there'll be a recording of this as well available on the BevCam site, so you'll be able to refer to it if there's anything you want to go back to. And those at home who are have questions about the process, things like that, this will be a good resource for you to be able to go back to look at the process, our schedule, frequently asked questions, and information we'll be covering tonight. With that, I would welcome a motion to go into public hearing.
I would like to make a motion, public hearing.
To open the public hearing, is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Opposed? So it's unanimous. We are now in public hearing. So we'll begin. As the members of the committee, we all have roles to play in helping to give you an overview of the Community Preservation Committee, what we do, the process, and also the public hearing portion or public input portion for tonight. And rather than being incredibly formal, what we've decided we're going to do actually is, as someone gets up and for that part of the agenda, the member will be standing at the corner in front of the screen with that microphone there to record things, so we'll be a little bit closer. And there's also a microphone there that during the question and answer period, during the public input period, that we'll share with you so that you don't have to get up to go to the podium, and just you could have the microphone. If you are going to be speaking, ask you to stand and say your name, address, and then go right to it. And that's basically the way we'll do it. So and again, I'm Derek Beckwith, the chair. Since I'm the first one to start, I'm going to get up now and walk over there. So I won't say anything until I'm in front of another microphone. So now we've moved all the way to slide 2 in the presentation. Here we go. We've done the welcome. Woohoo! And we're going to do a history of the CPA, the Community Preservation Act, here in Beverly. We'll go into the public hearing, and then we'll go into the nuts and bolts of filing applications, answering questions about, and we'll go over eligibility and things like that as well. So, my first role then is to move to the history of the Community Preservation Act here in Beverly. So this is the 11th anniversary of the Community Preservation Act here in Beverly. We started, last year was our 10th anniversary, so we'll talk a little bit about some of the projects that we funded last year that are just getting underway now, and other projects. But the CPA, the Community Preservation Act in Massachusetts, began in the year 2000 when the legislature passed a law enabling communities to set aside special fund dedicated solely for the purpose of community preservation. And then individual communities could opt into the CPA. Beverly itself, we joined in 2012. Okay, so this is our 11th year. The dedicated fund for community preservation has 4 purposes: open space, historic preservation, community housing, and recreation. And those are the areas where we can look at applications, make decisions, and approve funding or recommendations from our end. The fund itself is, the funds come from a surcharge on real estate taxes here in Beverly. The surcharge here is 1%. And so that money is set aside specifically for community preservation activity. The state also rewards CPA communities. In addition to the 1%, some communities do 2, 3%. There's a state match, not a full match, but a partial match that adds money on. And later on, Danielle actually is going to go over the budget, what our budget looks like this year, what's left over from last year, the totals available in different funds. Initially, every year, 10 of the money that goes into the fund based on the tax revenue, and we get the surcharge of 1% on that, 10% of the total funds collected are dedicated to a reserved fund for open space, 10% for a reserved fund for historic preservation, and 10% for a reserve fund, we call it the Community Housing Reserve for that. The balance of the money, then 70%, right, goes into what we call the general reserve. Okay, so that's the way that the money is officially set aside. That makes sure that communities are spending money on the purposes that were created, the CPA was created for in the beginning. Here in Beverly and in any city and town that opts into the community to become a community preservation community, there is a committee that is appointed. Representatives from various city boards and representatives of the general public are on the committee. Right now, we have 7 active members and 2 vacancies. And so, hey, if you're interested. What?
They have to be from specific committees.
Yeah. Well, open, well, look at our website, it has the membership there. Look at the vacancies, and then, but it's a really fun committee to be on, and it's very rewarding. At least I could say that from my perspective. It's really interesting. We do some really interesting, fun, important things for the city. And what we do is we oversee the Community Preservation Act activities. We establish the criteria for funding projects. We evaluate the applications and run the whole application process. We ultimately recommend project funding. The ultimate deciding entity in the city on that is the city council, the legislative body, and CPA communities. Then, votes to, adopt recommendations or, reject them, do whatever. I mean, it's a legislative process. But we oversee all the different activity leading up to that point. We also have a Community Preservation Act plan, a CPA plan for the city of Beverly. And we update that on a regular basis. We just made updates this year to it. It's available online on the city website. And then again, as we said like 4 times already, and we'll say probably 20 times, then there's the annual meeting with the public to get input on different ideas and to make sure we're letting as many people know as possible about how the process works and get feedback on the priorities that the public wants to see us pay attention to. So I think, pardon me? And I'll be closer to the microphone. And so that's an overview of the Community Preservation Act and committee here in Beverly. And now, to bring us into the topics of what we've accomplished and the budget, I'd like to introduce and ask Danielle Sprang to come up.
Thank you, Derek. So to date, as you heard, the CPA has been in existence in Beverly, and we've had 10 years worth of projects. What that's turned into is on the slide behind me. 93 full applications have been received by the Community Preservation Committee, and 75 projects have been funded under recommendations from the CPC that went to City Council and were approved. Those projects totaled almost $9 million in CPA funds, community funds. And for this funding round 11, we have almost $2.3 million available. And then we have a chart that talks about the CPA awards by category for projects that have been awarded in the past 10 years. And so you can see 37% of those went to historic resources, 32% to community housing, 15% to recreation, and 16% to open space. This year's budget is not formally approved by the City Council. It will go to them at their next meeting, but what we have recommended in consultation with the city's finance department is they've estimated for the next fiscal year that we would receive about just over $1 million from the surcharge that the city collects itself. We anticipate, through their talks with the state, receiving a state match of around $200,000. So the budget for this year is just over $1.2 million. And then, as Derek was talking about, there are 3 designations that get at least 10%. So that's the 3 that get the $121,000 for historic resources, community housing, and open space. we allocated we're asking to allocate 5% for the administrative budget, and then the general budget is the balance for any of the 4 types of projects, and that's just under 800,000. And then my last slide talks about the balances in the budgets for this round. So for historic resources, there's 138,000, just over 138,000. For community housing and open space, there's over 270,000 in each. In the general reserve, there's actually 1.618393 for the, because we're asking to allocate 5% instead of 3% into the administrative, which brings the total reserve to just under 2.3 million for this round. And I'm going to invite Derek back up to talk about the next section.
Danielle, I thought I was going to have more time to relax in my chair. You went right through that. So this is the interactive part of the evening, where we hear from you. Your ideas, thoughts, priority recommendations, whether it's projects that you are near and dear to your heart that bring you here tonight, that you're interested in and you'd like to see as priorities, or the general topics, whether it's something else that you're thinking of that you think the city should pay more attention to preserve, and that falls into one of the 4 categories. And you'll all know them by the end of the night. If you don't, it's open space, historic preservation, community housing, and then general reserve. Now, on that 4th category, recreation is, where we spend the money we spend on recreation will come out of the general reserve, not out of one of those other funds. We can also take the balance. There's a lot of money in the general reserve. We can use that for housing. It's not like you can't use it for any of the other purposes. You can. So we put together the formula based on what the projects are that come before us. We'll work our way through, say housing, reserve, and then come to the balance for a project in the general reserve. So, but that said, with Danielle helping too, we're trying to keep this really active here, right? And so we're hoping to get a lot of input. If you have anything that you'd like to talk about in terms of what you'd like to see in Beverly, us be considering, prioritizing, looking for as part of our efforts, then let us know that. And you'll see a chart later on that talks about the different ways we can spend money. We can't spend money on maintenance. We can't use regular budget money on maintaining, a property or a program or equipment or anything like that, okay? We have different uses: acquisition, creation, preservation. For housing, I think it's support. Isn't that the one that's where we could use money and support? And just as I talk about housing, in walks Andrew DeFranza, that's it. And also rehabilitation and restoration is another category. So you'll see the matrix, but many of you probably have an idea of that because you're here with something that you want to talk about. So that said, why don't we kick off? Your microphone, if you're speaking, should be green. So it's one push to put it green, one push to put it amber, which mutes it. If you're about to speak, just click it once to have it be green. So who wants to start us off?
You want to go in order? I didn't know.
Pardon me?
Order or no?
It doesn't have to be in order. We've asked people, if you speak, please sign your name and address to that. But also, before you speak, just say your name and address for all of us. Okay? So who wants to kick us off? Okay.
Yeah, my name is Mark Holland. I live at 34 Washington Street. Can you hear me? No?
Well, there's two things. One, that's for BevCam. So also speak loud enough so that we can hear you all as well.
So I'll start again. I'm Mark Holland. I live at 34 Washington, which is sort of right around the corner. Several of us are here tonight because the First Parish Church in Beverly, which you can see right there on the screen, is a historic building from the 1800s, which is a center point of the downtown community, and it does need some repair work. So I am on the building committee and representing the building committee. There are many folks here representing the parish at large, and so we very much hope to work closely with the committee and come up with a good quality, coherent application and file it this year.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sherry Guerin. I live at 59 Courting Street, and I am, in fact, a member of First Parish, and I totally support what Mark's talking about, but that's not why those of us with ECHO are here tonight, just to be honest. We're very, very concerned about the absolute dearth of affordable housing in Beverly. It's just not there, and it's a serious problem that needs to be addressed in a radical way, not just a few dollars here and there, but some serious. And we're part of a group of people that, as ECHO, that we're really looking at the affordable housing problem. We were here for the ADU meeting, and where'd he go? I saw the mayor here, but he must have disappeared. He made it really clear at that meeting when we were looking at the purposes of the changes in the regulations, is that right, for affordable housing? Is that what we call a regulation? That it did not include an affordable housing piece. And I absolutely understand why, and I support, he was looking at it from the point of view of expenses for folks that were going to do this, and would they even do it if it was going to cost them so much money and then they were going to get so little return. But I think this is one of those times when we can meet everybody's needs, because we also have Harbor Light here, and we have Habitat for Humanity here, and they have a lot of really good plans for how we can use some CPA, right?
CPA funds.
CPA funds to make affordable housing available, particularly in the ADU, by using those funds, and again, in a radical way. So that big chunk of money that they were, the $794,000 or something like that, some of that money needs to loosen up, because people need to have roofs over their head. I'm done.
Okay, who's next? Thank you both for kicking us off here.
Hi, finally got it. And Kim can adjust the volume levels. All right, dude. I'm Nancy Dillon. I live at 4 Middle Street, right near Central Cemetery. And I'm shifting gears a little bit, and I'd like to address the historic preservation aspect of the CPC funding. Central Cemetery is near and dear to my heart, and it needs some work. And we all know the fence does not fall under the CPC plans. It's not a historical fence. However, there is the dead house that was built in 1891, which is in serious disrepair, and it is to the point of that it's probably going to, a few good storms, the roof will probably come down on it. And I have noticed that in your 2018 CPC plan, under the examples of threatened or vacant municipality-owned buildings, that Briscoe was listed, the Powder House was listed, and so was the Dead House. Now, you've done a great job with Briscoe, Powder House is done, and I'm here to advocate for restoring the Dead House now. And one of the reasons is it can be actually put to use by the cemetery, by the engineering department. There was a structure that burned down in October 11th of 2015, a wooden structure that was housing cemetery materials at Central Cemetery, and it was replaced by 2 extremely ugly containers, metal containers. And the city probably has been renting them since then. And to restore the dead house, they could probably use that for storage of materials and actually put it to some use. And that's I don't know how to go about the process, but I would
Yeah.
like to put forward
Well,
that as a possibility.
That's interesting. One of the things for historic preservation, and you'll see in the guidelines, if you've looked, it has to be done according to the Secretary of Interior standards, but also the use of what it's being preserved for, and that use has to be something that's covered as well.
Okay.
So to have something turn into a storage shed or, something like that, we have to look at what the historical use of the property was, in that process too. So that'll be part of your prep if you're going to get involved in putting together and working with other people on this. Encourage you to meet with the members of the city, and we can help you, and the planning department staff can help point you to the right departments you should be talking to, the right individuals, so that you can, talk about what you'd like to help with and that sort of thing, and
Thank
then
you.
start that dialogue.
I have been in touch with the city, with my city counselor for Ward 4, and we were talking back and forth about the plans for the cemetery, and I have mentioned to him. So I will go back, and he can watch the video and
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
I put it forth. So I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, who's next?
We could just leave the mic on.
Yeah, you could just leave it on. You
It's
don't have
on,
to
can you
on
hear me?
now.
Okay. I'm here to advocate, do you want me to stand?
Stand and
Okay,
name,
my name
please,
is Ellie
and address.
Filior, live on 14 Morningside Drive in Beverly. And I'm here to advocate and find out information regarding the Girdler House. I am one of the volunteer board of director, on the board of directors. And since the pandemic, it was founded in 1885. It serves elderly women in Beverly, all of whom are considered low income, just above poverty level, so they can't get on Medicaid or Mass Health. And during the pandemic, of course, a couple of people left. So the house, the residence is 14 is capacity. They each have their own room, their own bathroom. Everything is provided, transportation, 3 meals a day, TV, activities. And during the time of COVID, we had to come up with PPE to make people safe and do different things that came out of our operating budget. Now we're faced with, in order to comply with the Board of Health, we need probably a brand new kitchen. The stove is only a 6-burner, it's 40 years old. The refrigerators, we have 5 refrigerators, and they're not energy efficient, and they need to be replaced. So to meet the standards for the Board of Health and everything, we do need some, and we would call it probably under community housing, in order to keep people safe there and take care of some of the needs. They also need a full house generator in case power goes out in the winter and everything. They have a partial generator, but it doesn't take care of the whole house. They are a 501c charity, but I think they were, when they originally were founded, they were listed as a private charity, not a public, and we have applied for to be a public charity. So I'm wondering, I just came here for information and wondering if we would qualify, number one, and how do we go about applying, because we've never applied.
Yeah. That's something that, what we have in the process is we have a pre-application that you come up with your project idea, you talk to, people from the city, for example, if it's city-owned property, et cetera. If it's not, then, we still encourage talking to people from the city who are knowledgeable about, what it might take. But to your point, we'd have to see if it's, if it would be rehabilitation or a restoration of a historic building, if you would have to get certification of the building as historically significant. Yeah.
If the facility does qualify under the eligibility for community housing, then it could also fall into the category of support. It may depend, but there are income requirements and restrictions to be considered affordable housing for the purposes of funding through the CPA. So you might have a couple different avenues, potentially.
Okay, because I know we are, definitely, we have talked to the Board of Health and everything. We know that we need to put in a new sink, a three-bin sink, one for food prep, one for disinfecting, and another one. So we have some of the things that we need, and we're trying to go forward with a plan and get, people from the inspection, housing inspection or public health or whatever.
So, it sounds like something to explore to see whether or not there's a category that we could find, or that you could find that we could entertain something, if it was support for community housing, if it was a historically significant building, for example, and, that sort of thing. So we can look at different avenues. We would need you to do a little bit more research probably, and then come up with, okay, does it qualify? And then we'd be able to also talk to the city solicitor's office too, if there's a technicality, see whether or not something would be covered. But Susie, you have
I
something
would
to
just
add.
like to offer that it's possible that your project could fit into two categories. The historic preservation and the community housing need. We're not exclusive to projects only
doesn't-
going into one. And it's an asset if you can fit in both. So keep that in mind when you're
Going forward,
going
yeah.
forward with
We
what you're thinking.
I did contact the Beverly Historical Society, and I haven't heard back from them yet, to see if perchance, because I have some of the, background of it, how it was founded. It's 1885. They moved into this building, I think, in the 1900s.
It's called the Home for Old Ladies.
It was. And in the 60s, they decided that wasn't a good name, so the chairman of the board was somebody Girdler, was her last name, so that's how I got the name.
I'm familiar. I think.
Thank you very, very much
little
for
argument on
raising that, putting that on our list of things to look at, and then hopefully the rest of the evening will help give you some information so that you can then begin working from here, and then we'll meet you in the middle someplace in terms of being able to help you with the pre-application and criteria for what could be funded.
That would be very, very helpful, and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Dan Richards, live at 29 Linden Avenue. First, I've gone through the process before, and thank you for supporting Gillis Park, which I'll be speaking on tonight. Gillis Park is one of the largest open spaces in Ward 2 for the neighborhood and for surrounding buildings that have been erected over the last 8 years. The population around Gillis Park has increased tremendously, and the traffic has increased. The park itself has been maintained to its current condition, or I should say its past condition hasn't moved forward into being ADA compliant. There are many areas in the park where kids cannot play because the mulch is about 12 inches deep, and some of the equipment is broken, and you've been supportive with that, so thank you. So I'll be looking towards the committee to help make the park more handicap accessible, the entranceway, a pathway around the park so that people who are handicapped are able to access all parts of the park, and also taking a look at the entranceway where there is a veterans monument of residents that fought in World War II, which needs to be restored as well. So there's a combination of open space, recreation, and historic in the park to bring it up to a level where everyone can enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Who's next? Now, it doesn't have to be a specific project, even though we welcome those comments, and it can also be I remember last year, we had the waterfront. That should be a priority for us. Access to the waterfront, as a wider issue. That came up as a priority for us to look at. And open space in general, open space in the areas of the city where we were seeing a lot of construction of apartments, buildings, and the argument being that people who are living in heavily congested areas really should have some open space, and that sort of thing. So these were priorities that were bigger picture, certainly. So if you have one of those or some of those in mind, nothing is too big, nothing is too small for us to look at. We've funded projects that are, $5,000 to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, okay, what possibilities, thoughts? Here we go.
How's it going? At my church, we have to tell people to speak closely into the mic, so I'm going to do my best to not need a reminder on that. My name is Paul Drake. I live at 8 Bartlett Street. I'm actually really happy to be here because I think of the CPC as like a happy committee, just because of all the work that you guys do, that you can kind of be like, oh, hey, there's this thing, and that's from the CPA money, and just appreciate your efforts and everything. So I have blue t-shirt on. I'm just really excited because I think Beverly, I was proud to vote for the CPA in 2012, and I'm really, it's the kind of thing that makes me proud of Beverly and for Beverly, because it means that we really take the needs of our community seriously, whether that's green spaces, whether that's historic preservation. All of these things are so important. One of the things that's really been bubbling up more and more in our congregations, and that's what kind of we're from various faith congregations here in Beverly and other organizations, and it's just housing is such a need. It's both a need for the members in our congregation and for the populations we serve, such as our weekly suppers program, which is a volunteer duty that we share. So whether people are homeless or, so myself, I've only been able to afford living here in Beverly because I've known friends who've been able to rent me at a discounted rate. I work for the city of Beverly. I'm a paraprofessional. It's very difficult to live here on what I make. I just looked up the average rent for here in Beverly, and it's about $2,500 a month. That's tough for a lot of people. It really is. And I'm really thankful that we have organizations here in Beverly like Harbor Light, like Habitat for Humanity, that are knowledgeable, competent, and they have the arms and the tools to do the work, and what they need is resources to do that. I'm also really excited about the fact that the city is poised to embark on ADUs, and I think that's really exciting. But they can be out of reach for homeowners to make if they were going to rent at a discounted rate. And even though they might be a little bit more affordable, I think it'd be really creative to sort of pump that project for the city and do that. And then last but not least, as a renter, I think there's opportunities for rental assistance. It can be hard if a landlord is asking for you to rent an apartment that you have to give first month, last month, and a safety deposit. That's going to price out a lot of people. That's a serious hardship. I have friends who have, the rent gets raised a lot, and the letter that tells them that the rent is going up almost kind of says, well, we could charge a whole lot more because of what's going on here. So it's like, oh, gee, thanks. So when I think of the CPC, I think of people that have this hero opportunity to really meet the needs of people, and you're juggling a lot. There's a lot of worthy things that have been talked about tonight, but I know there's a lot of us that are really talking about how we can help, put a little bit of the fire that the housing market's been on. So thank you for all of your efforts and for your time here tonight.
Thank you very much, Paul.
There was someone behind you, I think. Maybe not.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm Carol Gerard. I live at 87 Odell Ave in Beverly. And I wonder if you could be a little more clear about what repairs might be, are critical repairs something that could be covered under this, for housing, for individual housing. There are people who might be able to stay in their home but want to be safe, and so if their front porch is falling apart, or if, the stairs are in bad shape. Is that something that this fund could, in the $5,000 category, could take care of, or is that kind of really too small?
I think we look at, it's not a question of small or large in that area. I think it's more a question of if the money is going to, affordable housing, an affordable piece, rather than, so that's not to say that we couldn't entertain a project designed for income-challenged individuals.
Right, well, that's kind of who I was thinking
who are
of.
trying to stay in their homes. I mean, I'm trying to remember the wider description of what's possible. The book is up there with the full definition for community housing of all the different uses. We tried to get creative a few years ago during the pandemic, and we put together a rental assistance program for people who were impacted by the pandemic, who fell within the guidelines of 80%, I think it was, or down to 60% in that category of the area-wide median income, and the program was designed to be able to help people within those income brackets. So I think we'd have to look a little bit more deeply with that, but that's not to say that we couldn't. And Christy, you're just looking at me.
Well,
so.
I think it's hard because I think Robert is actually going to, and a little bit later in our presentation, talk about, you've mentioned this matrix where there's the categories of projects eligible, and then there's sort of the types of projects within those categories we can fund. And there are very specific definitions that were outlined in the actual act itself. And that's when we say we have to find a way to fit a project somewhere in one of those boxes in the matrix. I think some of your questions about some of your projects will be a little more clear, or at least then we'll have more time for Q&A at the end. You can ask a second question after you see you're entering the matrix. Because there are a lot of options and opportunities, and I think as Derek said, we try to be sort of thoughtful and as creative as we can be to find places for projects as long as it can fit. And so I think part of it is we'll have a little more context on sort of that eligibility criteria matrix a little bit later. But that's I think it's a great project. Thank you. A great project point.
Okay. Well, thank you, Carol.
Good evening. My name is Donald Preston. I reside at 3 Pickett Street in Beverly. I'm also a member of ECHO, but tonight I'm speaking on the part of Essex County Habitat for Humanity. And we would like to apply for a critical home repair program funding here in Beverly. We are doing it in Lawrence, Haverhill, Peabody, and in Danvers. And these repair projects usually come in under $15,000 each, usually in the $10,000, and they involve things like handicap ramps, accessibility in bathrooms, things that make a home accessible and livable. And we serve people in the 40 to 60% income range in the area of median income, and we income qualify those families. And our proposal, if possible, would involve a deed restriction that the city could use towards that affordability restriction. So these projects, we would income qualify people, review them, go over them. Most of our people in most of these communities are in more like the 30% to 20% income range. They're usually on a fixed income and elderly. So that's something we are going to be bringing forward to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I've lived in Beverly twice, and I just wanted to say, Don used to live across the street. Well, I used to live across the street from him. Because then I moved out because I couldn't afford to buy a home in Beverly back in the day. Moved to Newburyport where I could before the train was up there and it was more affordable. But I've been very fortunate to be back here for quite some time. So anyway, Don and his wife made the experience of living in Beverly so good I had to come back. Thank you. Okay, who's next? We covered everything? All of the ideas, thoughts, priorities, recommendations, needs, possibilities, and resources? Under what 4 categories do we have? Someone want to take a stab at it? Historic preservation. Community housing, recreation, and open space preservation. Okay, great. Everyone's got it. A. If there's nothing else, I think we can move on to the next part of the agenda. So now we're going to have Nancy come up, and she's going to talk a little bit about some success stories.
This is the fun part of the presentation, and this is the part that I choose every year to present to you. I represented throughout most of the funding rounds recreation, fortunately. And thank you to CPA members for funding recreation so generously. Moving forward, I'll be representing the Beverly Housing Authority because I'm on that board. As noted, since the adoption of the Community Preservation Act in 2012, we have awarded some $8.9 million in grants for a wide range of projects benefiting our whole city. So it's my pleasure to introduce 3 of those projects, and they're going to be representing historic resources. Some of you brought that up already. Recreation, and most importantly, community housing. I'll ask folks to speak briefly to their projects. For historic preservation, we presented this last year. It's a very dynamic and exciting project. It's the applicant was the Beverly Farms Improvement Society, and the total cost of the project thus far was $210,000, as you can see, and the funding sources to supplement what we awarded, Beverly Farms Improvement Society came up with $73,000, and then private donations $68,000. Now that's sort of an exception to a lot of the local projects. It's a beautiful project. They're restoring the historic fence all around that cemetery. And right now they're moving on to phase 2. So you brought up the Central Cemetery. Yes. And I went down to see already some of the work done on that fence, and it's made such a difference in that cemetery. So that's an example of historic preservation of a project that's benefiting the whole Beverly Farms community. It's right in the center of Beverly Farms, so it makes a big difference. And we thank the Beverly Farms Improvement Society for working closely with us. The next project is a favorite of mine. We're going to ask in a minute Bruce Doig, our Director of Community Services. Thank you, Bruce. Community Services, to talk about the Wentworth Tot Lot. And this was a project, it was initiated by a small group of families. And they wanted to take what it was there, which wasn't much, and develop it into something where their children could enjoy. And we awarded them $20,000 from the CPA, and Bruce will speak to a variety of other sources of funding. But what's important is how the neighbors banded together over a period of about a year, Bruce, and they raised money. And they did it through bake sales, and they did it through raffles, and whatever means they could come up with to raise the money for this beautiful tot lot. Bruce, do you want to speak further to that for us?
This is for you, Nancy.
Yes, correct. You can use that, please.
So again, my name is Bruce Doig. My official title is Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services, which includes several departments within the city. I just want to say the CPC has been incredibly generous with recreation over the years. I've applied for probably 30 projects. We had to pull some of those back for different reasons, but we've probably moved forward with about 20 to 25 of those projects. Everything from some historical preservation to many recreation projects, and even the purchase of Camp Paradise, which these folks, were able to contribute $450,000 towards the purchase of Camp Paradise, which was one of the first projects that we did. And so again, it's been a wide variety of projects, and again, a lot of different processes. But for this project, as Nancy said, the neighbors wanted to replace a tot lot that was installed by the developer of the neighborhood 20 plus years ago. And as you can see, the equipment was sparse. It was starting to show signs of wear and tear. And they were able to put together a design, working with some of the vendors, raise some of the funds from their end. And then, again, as you can see, the other funding sources besides all of the CPC or CPA funding went towards the playground equipment, which was about $28,000. But the other funding sources were the Recreation Department contributed some. We also had some state earmarks that we were able to contribute a significant amount of from, and also the David Lynch trustees, which they fund a lot of park purchase and park repair projects. And again, the private donations of a little over $18,000. So most of the projects I've been involved with, we've been able to work with neighborhoods. Somebody has an idea. Mr. Richards is talking about Gillis Park. We've already met several times to talk about that. And so that kind of gets the idea started. And then I can talk about whether we can apply for a CPC grant or whether we can apply for a state grant, or if the city money is available. I have a Park of the Year fund every year. It's not huge, but it can contribute to small projects or to a larger project in part. So the process is pretty straightforward. We've always just applied, filled out the pre-applications, depending on what the category is, meet with the CPC, it gets declared eligible or not. And then if it's declared eligible, we move forward with a full application, which does take some legwork and some, history and things like that. And also, again, the big thing for me has always been partnering with neighborhood groups and other people or other groups to get the funding together, because we can't rely on CPA funding to pay for everything, but if we could partner with other groups, we could definitely make it happen. So happy to answer any questions if there are any, but other than that, again, we've been very successful working with CPA grants, and we hope to continue doing so. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. And last but never least is our final project, and probably one of the most exciting that's been built in Beverly in a long time. The Anchor Point project is Harbor Light Homes. Their mission is to break the cycle of poverty by creating, managing, and advocating for affordable housing with wraparound services for families, elders, essential workers, and individuals. And this is a perfect example of their mission. And so, again, last but not least, let me introduce my friend and neighbor, Andrew DeFranza, the executive director of Harbor Light Homes, to speak to this project.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody. Glad to be here. This is Anchor Point 1, phase 1 of 2 phases. As you can see there, if you have driven by the high school at all in recent days, that's where I was before this, trying to figure out high school open house. I thought it was the one where you could go into each teacher, but it was the one where you had to follow their schedule. So I was already late when I got there, which is pretty par for the course. So I'll do the next one. Anyway, so I came here instead. So yeah, this is 38 apartments for families, all below 60% of median, with a substantial chunk below 30%. I believe we ended up with 10 units below 30% of median income. These are all 2 and 3 bedrooms, an even split. This was permitted under a 40R district. Many of you were here when the 40R district was passed. I know Paul was, and some others, which was pretty exciting. The room was very full here when that got approved. and that had to be an action of the city council to allow for that to get built. So underneath that permit, there were 77 units total. This is phase one. The next phase has been funded and by the state, and we're working toward closing some of the gaps on that project based on the construction escalation, which the city is also helpful with, which we appreciate. This committee, the trust, and home funds through the mayor's office. As I mentioned before, this phase is 38 units. The next phase will be the inverse of it. It's essentially the same building flipped, 39 units. We are raising private philanthropy, about $5 million, for a building called the Community Center, which is behind it, the Lighthouse Center. And that's going to be a place where we host a lot of services from our partners and friends that'll be augmented for the residents who are living there to help them be able to improve their economic situation and overall quality of life. So that's going to include daycare, on-site adult education in the evenings, outdoor play spaces, both half-court basketball court, outdoor garden spaces, and playgrounds. This playground you see here is already built. That was built with phase one. So we've raised about $2.8 million for that. So we're in the hunt. And the hope is that we're going to be able to close on phase two in December and then build the Lighthouse Center along with that. But this building, as I said, is built, if you haven't seen it, and is fully occupied. We had about 600 applications for 38 slots. I think that was by the lottery. Now we have something like 850 have applied for this. So obviously many more than we could house, which is difficult. We actually did the lottery at the library downstairs, and for this one I was the number picker. So we had a glass jar, and I was picking the numbers. And interestingly enough, no one ever comes to lotteries when in person, and we were in the room to the right. Thank you. Not the other one. You should know that, Bruce. That was well done, sir. The room to the right, not where I vote in the room to the left. So anyway, the room to the right. And it was packed. There was like 100 people in there. And then there was another 100 on Zoom. So I'm picking these numbers. And it doesn't really work like if you pick the number you know when you got a unit. But that's how people felt about it. So you're picking the numbers, and it's difficult because as you go, I'm trying to joke with people and make it a little easier because it's evening, you have people with their children, they're hoping for something good, and you're trying to joke with them. And I had people start to call out their number, call 52, right? Or like, they had a lady in the front row, she was like with her hands like this, call this. And of course, it didn't matter which number because it was just an ordering, but it just shows you a level of the kind of the human condition around it and the level of need. So people have been very excited to move in. It's been fully occupied since. It is home to an array of essential workers. So we have people who work at the post office, for the school department, for the school next door, for Whole Foods, for Amazon, for local health institutions. So it's like the assortment of essential workers across the board that are living there. We had a number of homeless families, formerly homeless families, I think 11, move in, and were able to regain their independence for themselves and their children as a result of this, and they're doing all very well. So that's kind of the skinny. I think the closing numbers ended up being about 20 million, so that'll give you a sense of the cost escalation during that period of time, mostly on construction. At the moment, we're dealing with construction and interest rate fluctuation, but we keep plugging ahead. So happy to answer questions about that if it's useful. But that's kind of what it is. But big kudos to all of you, and thank you for participating. It's takes a long time to do, and a lot of people to do, but we're grateful for Beverly being such a great community and the CPC being a part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Andrew. Actually, I had a question or two
Sure.
To work in. Now, you said for Anchor Point 1, it was about 20 million? Is that
About
what you
20,
said?
yeah.
And I think that, according to the sheet I'm looking at now, I think we're in for about 250,000 for that round. But one of the important things for these these projects, these very, very large community housing projects, is that the funders, the state, the feds really need to see local involvement, and so that's a big part of it. So the 250,000, also, when you look at the investment that the CPC made there, look at the amount of money that was being spent in Beverly, and and for Anchor Point 2, and I know that you haven't finished closing the gap there. I know CPC is in for some, a chunk there, about 400, I think. We'll see what happens further in terms of closing the gap. But what we're seeing with just financially, the investments that we make in the community in housing projects like this, and what it generates actually in terms of construction projects, jobs, but then long-term affordable housing for people. I mean, it's quite remarkable what the CPC or the CPA fund is able to do, especially with the larger projects, when you look at the difference in the communities.
Yeah, leverage is critical. And maybe two follow-ups to that, if I may, Mr. Chair. These projects pay real estate taxes. Some people don't know that, so for the general public, if it comes up, pay real estate taxes. So this was a vacant lot before, so the real estate tax payments are higher. This is also, Ms. Wynn is working on this because this was done in a 40R district. The city will be eligible for 40S payments from the state, which is to help offset the cost of school children that might have been added as a result of the project because it's in a 40R. That's pretty unique. And so we're excited, I think, at least I'm excited, to see how that works and what kind of cash flow might come back to the city for that purpose. So those were a big deal. And the second thing is that with Ms. Wynn and Mr. Clausen's efforts, the city also was able to get a MassWorks grant. So all those sidewalks that you see and the rework of the intersection, all of that was mutual leverage to a different source for just under $1 million for general public work for that to improve the intersection and all the connectivity of those sidewalks. I love to see kids walking down now, Sawyer Tozier, walking to school down those big broad sidewalks that the state paid for the city to secure. So it's an interesting layer upon layer upon layer. So.
Yeah. And it's not just Harbor Light too. I mean, we do give housing money to other organizations.
Sure.
The YMCA, for example, project on Cabot Street, wonderful project downtown as well. Another big investment in the city. So, yeah.
And if I might add, the Beverly Housing Authority, although state and federally funded, I always say we support low to no income.
It's true.
Folks, our Balch Street facility was built, in late 50s, Andrew?
Yeah, gotta be.
State funding is limited for housing authorities. But thanks to the CPA's initial approval of funding, we were entered into a lottery statewide. Now, you can imagine how many housing authorities were applying for limited amount of money for rehabilitation and preserving existing housing. Because of that, we were awarded over $3 million. That's an ongoing project right now. And if it wasn't for so the state saw that the city of Beverly is stepping up.
Yep.
And they're stepping forward to support our housing authorities. Many people are under the impression, well, you have state money, you have federal money. I don't know about you. Those of you maintaining a home know how expensive it is. And when you have 800 of them, 800 units, badly need of a lot of them of repair. This was an amazing project. It's almost finished. So
it's great.
I can publicly thank the CPA for that. We're almost done with it. Andrew, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any questions? You go. I don't know if Dan.
Oh, we have a question from the audience. We have a microphone here. If you want to come up to the microphone, if you could state your, the podium. State your name and address. That'd be great.
My name is Dan Winchell, and my address is 5, Rowell Avenue in Beverly. I just had a question for Andrew, and it might be out of order, but did the CPA produce any funding for the Briscoe School?
Yes,
Yes.
we did, yeah.
Yes, quite a bit.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
And that project is, massive cost-wise comparatively. That's about $55 million. And crosses the various lanes, as Susie was mentioning before. So historic open space and housing is sort of a threefer. And I guess recreation because of the fields. That number I don't have off the top of my head, but I want to say it was close to $1 million.
Yeah.
1.1, yeah. So,
And as you can see from all these projects, they ran the gamut, from very large-scale housing projects to local recreation projects, to historic preservation of a beautiful fence. So our projects they run the gamut, and I encourage you to use your resources in the city and on the CPA board when you're interested in learning how to, which will be explained to you in a minute, how to apply for these funds and how to qualify based on the project that you're interested in. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
And now Lamont is going to come up and show us, here we are, Beverly, and explain what this map means.
Oh, I can see this better. Hi, everybody. This is Beverly. This is our map. The purpose of this map is sort of to show we've got 4 color dots here for each category, which Derek has drilled us in all-knowing to be recreation, historic resource, community housing, and open space. The point of this map is to show that we have pretty wide distribution across our whole city of where CPA funds are landing, and a wide variety of categories and types of projects, small projects, big projects. Most projects are, the CPA component is only part of the funding for it, and some is many. Except for open space, we need a few more green dots there. That's the toughest nut to crack on acquiring open space. But we're pretty geographically dispersed until I flip the script. Is anybody think of a place where they don't know about a CPA project? I mean, I see most people in the room have actually applied for one before, so that's great. But where can we use more dots? Like, we've got lots of open spaces with no dots. We've got corridors downtown which are well covered, and that's where our density is. That's fantastic. So what I'm thinking about is to look at not just where the funds have gone, but where the funds could go, and what projects are in your area where you live, work, where you travel to and from work, that could use a bolster of support from our funding. And I think that's what I was getting at. So anyway, if anybody has any comments, I would take them. Otherwise, I just keep it short and invite you to think about maybe where some projects, big or small, can fit in. Historic projects don't have to be big, sexy mansions or homes. They can be documents or statues or there's different scales. So you don't have affordable housing. I know it's easier on a big scale, but it can be done on a small scale. If you know of a parcel that could be potentially acquired for open space by the city, let the city know. We may not know about it. And anyway, that's my invitation to you all to think about maybe where we could put some more dots on the map for next year. And now, Mr. Robert Buxbaum.
Okay, my role up here is to talk about the matrix, which we've been discussing. So I think you've already heard about it, so maybe I'll just, no. Anyway, we have this box or spreadsheet, maybe because I'm a scientist, that's why I was asked to do this, because I'm work with spreadsheets. But anyway, this is how the committee looks at different projects, and you'll see this when we go through the application, that you actually write these things down on your application, which category you are, open space, historic, preservation, recreation, and housing. So I think by the end of this meeting, we should all be able to say that in our sleep. And then on the vertical line, it's the different activities, acquire. So for example, the yes means you can use funds to acquire open space, you can use funds to acquire historic resources for recreational resources or housing. Create, you can use funds to create open space. You can't create historic funds because it's either historic, it's got to be there. So that's, I think you can see where it's sort of very logical, recreation and housing. And then, and you can go through the rest of the matrix and you see how that plays out. Now, the only category that would allow support, and support often means some of the things we've just been talking about, like grant funding, subsidies, is with the housing. So that is the only thing where, that's the only category that supports support. And then rehabilitation and restoration, in some of those categories, like with the open space, I don't know if you can read it, it says, is unless acquired with CPA funding. So you can rehabilitate open space if the money was acquired, if it originally was bought with CPA funding, and the same with housing. One of the things we wrestle with often on our committee is how to fit these into categories, whether they're legitimate. And these were actually, this table actually comes from the State Department of Revenue, so it's kind of, we got to sort of listen to this and adhere to the guidelines that we have here. So it does lead to a lot of lively discussions, like when does something cross the boundary between maintenance versus really capital improvements, which is really the rehabilitation and restoration is supposed to be capital improvements. Or there was a case where with one of the low-income housing, affordable housing projects where the roofs were falling in, which one could look at and say, well, that's deferred maintenance, but we needed to preserve it because we would have lost that. So we fit that under the preservation category, and it was fit into that. So that worked out very well. So I would say this leads to a number of lively discussions among the committee, which you're welcome to come to our meetings and help us participate in. And I think when Christy goes through the application, you'll see a little bit more about this. The only other thing I would like to say about eligibility, and this, I was reading there's a statewide community preservation coalition, which we get a lot of advice from. So sometimes we have a project, we're not sure how well it fits, and we'll ask them, and they're very, very good about getting back to us, and we're members of that coalition. And one of the things it did talk about, which comes up as an issue, is do private projects, privately owned projects, can they apply for CPA funds? And that's come upon to us a number of times. And certainly that they can with certain provisos. It has to be for a public purpose. And often with a private project, and we had an example with the Cabot, for example, which is private. We funded the historical restoration of the entranceway there. And what towns do, and us included, is do what they call a clawback proposal. I never knew what a clawback proposal was until I was on this committee, which means that if the private entity that owns it sells it, then we get back some of the fund, a certain amount of the funding, depending on how long it took. So if you do it, and a number of the projects that people mentioned here with the church, for example, has to be a public purpose, a historical purpose. And the housing, there are clawback proposals, but you can you can apply for CPA funds, and as long as it has it's for a public purpose that benefits the public. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who's going to talk about the application process.
If I might add, if anyone wants to come to our meetings, be prepared for at least 3 hours when we vet these, applications, at least 3 hours.
There's one thing about the members of the committee, we like to talk, so, anyway.
You've proven that this evening, Derek.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, everybody. I'm so excited to see you all tonight. I was really happy to hear about the ideas that you had. And I would agree with the statement that we're the happy committee. I think we're so pleased to be given the opportunity and the honor to sort of be the overseers of this fund on behalf of the citizens of Beverly. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. And I think I would argue with Nancy. She said she had the most fun part of the presentation. I think it's actually me, because I'm going to tell you some more information on how you can actually apply for this funding. Before I actually get to we're going to talk a little bit about important dates in the application process, some components of the application that you should be aware of if you're about to, make the jump into applying for CPA funding, and then some other sort of resources and information that you can look to help you if you're developing your applications. But I want to preface it all by saying a lot of information has been flying at you tonight. It is all available on the website. So if you go to the City of Beverly's website and you look for the Community Preservation Committee's pages, the application is posted there, the pre-application, the matrix that we just looked at in more detail, this timeline that we're about to talk about, it's all there. So if you feel after this meeting you didn't catch it all, there's a one-stop source of information that you can check out. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the upcoming and important deadlines. Here we are, September 14th, kicking it all off with our annual information meeting. We do have our regularly scheduled CPC meeting next Thursday. So if you have a question that comes up after the fact, or you want some more information, you want to talk about a project idea that you have in more detail, you're absolutely welcome to come. That's sort of the intent of that meeting, is to invite prospective applicants to come in and talk about the project. We can answer any questions that you might have. On that same day, if you are thinking of applying for a project under historic preservation, it's the only category that has a little extra requirement, and that is that the property or the asset has to be deemed historic by the Historic Commission. So in order to do that piece, you will either by September 21st, and there's another one coming up, but September 21st or October 19th, you have to submit an application for historic projects to the Beverly HDC in time for their September 28th meeting. So that's just a little sidebar if you've got a historic application. And then we do, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but we have what we call a sort of a two-step application process. The first step is a pre-application. It's sort of tell us the nuts and the bolts of the project that you have in mind that allows us to determine if it's eligible for funding. So it's a short and sweet 2-page pre-application that we then look at to see if there's eligible for funding, at which point we would invite you to submit a full application. So that October 12th deadline is specifically for pre-applications. And I'll talk about the pre-application, and you'll see a little picture of it in just a minute. So pre-applications due by noon, October 12th. Next slide. There's sort of two opportunities if you have a historic project to get your application into Beverly HDC for that determinant of historical significance. So the first was September 21st. The second is October 19th. If you can make it to one of those, then, and there's a determination of historic significance, then you've met that eligibility criteria, at least for the historic preservation project. So at our October regularly scheduled CPC meeting and our November meeting is when we will be looking at and discussing and making decisions on those pre-applications. Applicants are welcome and invited to come and join us at those meetings. We often will have questions. As Nancy said, they're always a good long time, so be prepared for an interesting but long discussion. But that happens in October and November, so that by the beginning of December, we can notify all pre-application folks as to whether or not their application has been deemed eligible for consideration of funding and invited to submit a full proposal. And I think the one important note is a determination of eligibility for funding is not a guarantee for funding. It just means you get to move to step 2 of the process, which is the sort of the longer, more involved application that gives our committee much more information about your proposed project. So step 1 is eligibility, sort of step 2 is the big kahuna, so to speak. So that's on December 1st. Everyone will be, pre-applicants will be known if they're considered eligible, invited to submit a full proposal, and then at our, I believe it is our regularly scheduled December meeting on the 14th, we'll have another open session for applicants to come in, and we do a Q&A, answer any questions that we have, or that you might have, maybe we have them too, who knows, that you have, and walk through the application in more detail so that you're feeling, well prepared to put that together. That application, full application, is due on January 17th, 2024, by noon. Dun, 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 dun. Good job, you got your application in, and then it's all up to us. No, I'm just kidding. So there is a written comment component that folks can comment on the applications that were received. The deadline for that is February 1st. And basically every meeting that we have, it's funny, we're missing that deadline, but basically every meeting that the CPC has from January, when applications are received, until sort of this April, May timeframe is when we are discussing, deliberating on those applications and making decisions for funding recommendations. So applications that are selected for funding or funding recommendation are presented then to the City Council. City Council will deliberate on those recommendations, typically at their April and May meetings, so that by June, it's all over. And at that point, the projects from that round that have been selected for funding have been approved. So,
yeah, and I just mention that the City Council can approve, but they can't increase the amount of funding. They can reduce the amount of funding, but they can't increase the amount of funding. So that's what their role is.
That's a good point. And I think it's an important point to know that it ultimately is the City Council who approves the projects and the funding. We're just making recommendations from the committee's perspective. So that's it for sort of the important upcoming dates and deadlines. Again, that's available information on the website, so you can check that out. And I think without further ado, we'll take a look at the pre-application.
Can you just mention when they can start their projects?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to mention that as part of the next part. Yeah, but if I forget to, Darlene, you will remind me, which I think is good. So I mentioned that it's a 2-step application. This is the whole pre-application. Look, it's so reasonably, approachable. It's 2 pages. It's the nuts and bolts, the who, the what, the where, the why, the when. There's some cues in this application to help sort of draw out the information that we're looking for that'll help our committee make that eligibility determination. So this is what's due on by that October 12th deadline. And if you have sort of questions, like I said, I invite you to come next week to our meeting. You're certainly welcome to ask them here. But for anybody out there in the BevCam world, you can come to our meeting next week and ask those questions. So if your pre-application is determined eligible and you're invited to submit a full application, there is, like I said, that information session in December where we can provide more guidance, sort of dig in deeper to that full application. Again, full application is available right now on the website, so you can check it out. But the full application has 8 different sections. It has lots of prompts to help sort of draw out the information that we're looking for. A lot of it is requested in a narrative form, sort of tell us about your project, tell us how it benefits the community, tell us what eligibility criteria it meets. So there's prompts to help you fill that out. I'm not going to go over those, honestly, in a lot of detail tonight. I'm just going to point out 2 specific sections that are really critical for us in our evaluation, and I think for you to have a better understanding of as you start this process. That's sections 5, the project budget, and section 6, the project schedule, and that's going to fit into what Darlene had said about starting the project. So if we can go to the next slide. So these are 2 forms that you're asked to fill out as part of the full application. The first, the project budget, is asking you, the applicant, to tell us essentially all the costs that are associated with your project. Identify which of those would be considered
CPA funding, the CPA funding that you're asking for, what that would be paying for. It also asks you to identify any other sources of funds, whether they've been secured, whether it's pending, could be a grant, could be private donations, whatever it happens to be. So it's basically a funding picture, money coming in, what your request is to the CPA, what those funds would be used for. We do ask that as part of your project budget that you get quotes, sort of professionally prepared quotes, or sort of supporting documentation to accompany the numbers that you put in the budget. So we know that the budget is based in, we'll call it reality, but the budget is based on information that is accessible as opposed to just a number that's been pulled out of your hat. So we ask for professionally prepared quotes or other supporting documentation for that. And it's very hard to see. It's in this little bit on the bottom in the yellow. And I'm going to turn to the slide because I honestly can't see it here. But the point that Darlene had made, which is CPA funds cannot be used for any project cost that's incurred prior to final funding award decisions and the execution of a project MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And if you think back to what that project schedule was, that would be June at the earliest, right, when city council decisions are made, the final funding recommendations have been approved, and then a Memorandum of Understanding is written with the project proponent and signed. That's the point. From that point on, eligible costs could be qualifying for CPA funds. Anything before that, we can't pay for. So just important to keep that in mind. Did I hit it, Darlene? She said, yes, all right. And then the project schedule, similarly, we want to have a sense of what is the timeline for this project and any milestones along the way that are going to help sort of be cues to sort of final completion and success. And again, the project start and sort of the project completion. Project start, we would recommend project doesn't start until after award decisions are made because you can't use funds for that if it starts before the decisions are made. So oftentimes you'll see a project start sometime June or later. It doesn't have to be June, it can be later than that, but we just want to have a sense of the timeline and the milestones for that project. And I think last but not least, I'd mentioned the website. I'm going to say it again. There's a document, sort of everything in all-in-one document on the website that's called the CPA Application Guidance and Instructions 2023-2024. And it's like a one-stop source of the matrix, and go to the website. There's links to the Community Preservation Plan, there's links to the Community Preservation Coalition, the Housing Plan. Anything that you may think you might want to look at in developing your application or to get more information, there's probably a link to it on that website. So I would encourage you to go there if you're thinking about a project or a proposal. And always, you're welcome to come to any of our meetings to ask questions. We're always available. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Derek. And I think we have a little more time at the end for more Q&A.
For Q&A. So, yeah. So the microphone right here, or actually you can come up to the podium if you have questions. So, yes. You could form a little line if you want and just introduce yourself. And
excuse me. I was just curious, what percentage of the recommended funding projects does the city council not approve?
City council, so since I've joined the committee about 5 years ago, I cannot think of one project that the city council did not fund that we recommended.
Yeah, I've been on the committee since its inception, 10 years, and I can't think. There's definitely been they've had some serious and good discussions about projects. Often there were projects that we had serious discussions about, but they've always funded everything we've asked for.
They've never lowered the amount?
I don't think so, no.
I don't believe so.
No?
Great.
I remember.
Thank you.
I think they know that we vetted the project for 4 and 5 hours before it came to them, so they don't want to go through it again with us, but that's a good question, question.
If you could say your name, sir.
Hi, my name is Nat Carpenter. I had a short question and a long question. The short question was that one, so I'm glad you did it. For the longer, could you take the slide back to the yes/no matrix one? So the nouns are horizontal and the verbs are vertical. I'm interested in the housing column, where you have preserve yes, support yes, rehab and or restore no. Do these definitions provide restrictions for you or places for creativity in evaluating applications? Thank you.
I would say both. I mean, I think we've, yeah, I mean, I think that they're guidelines for us to go through. But for example, I think I used the example of the rehabilitated roof, which was an affordable housing unit that had been there for a long time. So before we had CPA, and we felt it fit under the preserve category, so that fit, so we could fund it. So yeah, there was some amount of creativity there. I don't know, anybody else?
And I would say that if you look, this is I think a more simplified version of the matrix. If you look on the website, sorry, but if you do look on the website, you'll see it's called the Community Preservation Fund Allowable Spending Purposes Chart. The matrix sounds much cooler, so that's why we call it that. And it has these same, as you said, nouns and verbs, but it has far more sort of the description of what that means. So for example, under community housing, the description is housing for low and moderate income individuals and families, including low or moderate income seniors. Moderate income is less than 100% and low income is less than 80% of US HUD area-wide median income. So that is the definition of what qualifies as a community housing project. And then there's similar, it's like more verbs and nouns for what is the description of acquisition, what's the description of creation. So I would encourage you to look at that, because I think that that's same. It gives us some flexibility, but it also gives us some constraints, because we have to be able to point to a box and say, it fits this category definition and it fits this sort of purpose, this activity definition.
Yeah. And it's also those. I'm just looking at this is the chart. You don't want to put that up in a PowerPoint slide. So we simplified it, but the chart actually, this is the glass half full versus half empty. For where it says under the last category, rehabilitate and restore, this says yes, if acquired with CPA funds. And that says no, unless acquired by CPA funds. So,
that's a good point.
You know, perhaps when we redo this slide next year, we'll change that around, but this is taken from the CPC website. So.
Hi, Mark Holland. I'm just curious how you distinguish between preserve and rehabilitate, restore.
So I can read those definitions if you want. Preservation means the protection of personal or real property from injury, harm, or destruction. So it's protecting it from destruction, being destroyed. And then for support, it says support of community housing includes but is not limited to programs that provide grants, loans, rental assistance, security deposits, interest rate write-downs, or other forms of assistance directly to individuals and families who are eligible for community housing, or to an entity that owns, operates, or manages such housing for the purpose of making housing affordable. So they leave the definitions a little bit open, but those come from the state.
Oh, can you do the rehabilitate and restore? Because I think that was the other one.
Yes.
I have it right here.
Yeah, I've got it.
It's long. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So rehabilitation is capital improvements or the making of extraordinary repairs to historic resources, open spaces, lands for recreational use, and community housing for the purpose of making such historic resources, open spaces, lands for recreational use, and community housing functional for their intended uses, including but not limited to improvements to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other federal, state, or local building or access codes, provided that with respect to historic resources, rehabilitation complies with the standards for rehabilitation stated in the United States Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, codified at, and it cites the citation, provided further that with respect to land for recreational use, rehabilitation shall include the replacement of playground equipment and other capital improvements to the land or the facilities thereon, which make the land or the related facilities more functional for the intended recreational use.
So it's specific yet flexible, and so that's where we, and that's, that's where we also look, in the pre-application, we have a discussion about what the categories would be that you have suggested in your pre-app, but when we send you the notification that we welcome a full application, we also tell you what the eligibility would be. So you just use that for the application that you're making. You're no longer, guessing, does this fit? You know that we're saying we feel it is eligible under this particular category. So, and that's part of the pre-app and then full app process, so that you're not presenting some long project application where we feel maybe you should be going in a different direction with it or a different category or something, so that we're all on the sort of the same page. And then we say we welcome a fuller one, and then you really fill out the detail.
Hello, I'm Babette Loring at 569 Hale Street. I don't have a project, but I want to thank the people of Beverly for passing this. And a couple of you, we worked together very hard to get this passed. I can't remember what year it was the first time it was turned down, when we could have gotten a lot more money, but that's okay, we have it now. And I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you to all the people who have projects. And I just think what you all are doing and the hard work you're putting in is wonderful.
And to thank you for helping us pass it.
Yeah.
You were a big part of it.
Well, it's one of my proudest things. I lived here.
Any other questions, comments? Well, we look forward to seeing your applications. We look forward to seeing you. And we look forward, we again meet a week from right now. We'll be sitting around that informal table over there. And hopefully this has been an educational night for you. It has been definitely for us. So thank you very much for coming. And with that, I'd take a motion to close our meeting.
Motion to close the meeting.
We need Tom here to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is the close the hearing first, and then we adjourn the meeting.
Close the public hearing.
Seconded by Robert. All in favor? Okay, unanimous. And with that, I welcome a motion to close the meeting.
Make a motion to close the meeting. That's my favorite part of the meeting.
And that's it. And we're hereby closed. So thank you, adjourned. Thank you very much.